Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to Healthy Habits for a Healthier Home. I'm here to help you create a healthier life, one simple shift at a time. If you're a mama ready to ditch toxins, clean up your family's nutrition, and build daily habits that support your well-being, you're definitely in the right place. Each episode is packed not only with education, but practical tips and tools to help you transform your health and your home without that feeling of overwhelm. So let's take this journey together to create a thriving, low-tox home for you and your family. If you're ready, say, I am ready. Now let's get into this episode. Hey y'all, I am super excited today. We have Dr. Nicole Cain on, and I know you're going to get so much from this episode. You'll have so many 1% shifts to take away and try on. I think this episode is really going to resonate. So welcome, Nicole. How are you doing?
I'm so good. Happy to be here. This is going to be probably the highlight of my day, chatting with you.
I love podcasting is my favorite. I love meeting people and just hearing their story. So let's start there. I would love to know, you have written a book called Panic Proof, and that is really what drew me to you. I love your content, and all the things you say, I think, are things that people need to hear. And I think they're helpful tools. So how did you get on this path? And then what prompted you to write your book? And then we'll get into the juiciness of it all.
So it starts with questions. And I'm actually curious, based on your experience, if you've had the same questions, because I just love to hear. I'm kind of interviewing all these people about their life experiences as I reflect on mine. So when you were growing up, or maybe even in your research, have you ever heard the messaging that anxiety is a part of the human experience and we just kind of have to live with it?
Yes, not in those exact terms, but it is something that we all experience. For me, it's we need to find tools to regulate ourselves through it, because it's not something that we should expect should never happen to us.
Ooh, I love the nuance in what you said. And as I was growing up, I didn't receive that nuance from
Yeah,
my healthcare
mine either.
practitioners. It's just unbelievable. And so I remember being in third grade and I loved first aid. It's something that's like very concrete and tangible that a little person can do. Like, you have a scratch, I can give you a Band-Aid. The third
Yeah.
grader can do that. So I had my little fanny pack and I was able to observe and witness in life if somebody got a little ouchie or a little scrape, that I felt empowered to help. And
I
the
love that.
person got better, right? We know that the body will naturally heal its scrapes and cuts and bruises, and we don't even have to think about it. So I was kind of programmed in this way with these observations. And then I started to become more aware of emotions and family dynamics and my role in family dynamics, and starting to notice these thoughts and these emotions. And to be more specific, I grew up in a family that was very Midwestern Dutch and very, my dad was a Marine, so you don't talk about your feelings unless you're angry.
Right.
And anger is the only emotion that's permitted, and kind of that children are the ones that should be sort of seen but not heard. So lots of suppression. And my role in the family was to provide those emotional band-aids that I had been providing in a concrete way. And so trying to regulate people, trying to appease them, trying to cheer them up, trying to calm their anger, and also trying to manage all of my own big feelings as a human being.
Mhm.
And finally, they took me to the doctor because I was sad and I was anxious. And probably now that we have the language in 2025 and you and I are chatting, probably a lot of trauma, right?
Mhm.
But my doctor said, well, anxiety is just something you're going to have to deal with. Here's a pill, and you'll probably have to take it for the rest of your life. And I was like, pills for anxiety sound way worse than a Band-Aid for a scratch.
Right. And how old were you at this time?
I was 10.
Okay.
And so I had asthma, I had nasal congestion, which is interesting because we found in the clinical research that kids that grow up in a lot of stressful homes are much more likely to have reactive immune systems. And so asthma is much more common in kids who are under emotional stress at home than kids who aren't. So that's interesting. Who knew back then in the 80s that my immune system could have been responding to my environmental emotional stressors? So by the time I got to college, I was on 6 prescriptions. I was no healthier. These prescriptions weren't making me healthier. I was arguably feeling less healthy, more symptomatic. And I believed that that was just all there was for me. That's what I'd seen.
Yeah. And honestly, when you have a doctor that says, which is a very common sentence, you know, it's just something you live with. So you mask and you try to use all the prescriptions to mask the I have to live with this kind of a theory. So
yeah.
so glad we're in the day and age we are, where we know so much more.
Yes, and thanks to you and other amazing trailblazers that are spreading the word. And so what ended up happening and the birth of Panic Proof was that I was managing and went to school to study cognitive behavioral therapy. So I got my master's in CBT and clinical psychology. I wanted to do it more naturally. I wanted to do it my way. So then I went to medical school, but it was specifically naturopathic medical school. And so now I have the same philosophy, but the tools are different. Somebody may go into a standard conventional doctor for anxiety and receive an antidepressant, and maybe they go to a functional or a naturopathic doctor for anxiety and they receive lavender tincture, right? And that worked until it didn't work. And in 2015, I hit this not sort of rock bottom, this true rock bottom. Terrible panic, terrible anxiety. I lost so much weight. I stopped having my period. I wasn't able to sleep. I wasn't able to eat. It was just so devastatingly debilitating. And the symptoms that I had been trying to suppress, avoid, ignore, manage, or otherwise target, it didn't work anymore. It's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. And so many people go through life feeling like this. Like I've tried everything and nothing works. It's like you're sitting on sharp, spiky tacks, and maybe a chiropractor will take out one of the tacks, but it still hurts. And so there's lots of tacks. So what ended up coming out of that rock bottom, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have alchemized that, what came from it is to then start to look at the why, to start asking a lot of whys. Why am I anxious? Why can't I sleep at night? Why is my chest on fire? Why can't I breathe through my nose? What is my body trying to tell me? And instead of trying to suppress and manage the symptoms, I started to lean into the wisdom of the symptoms. And once the philosophy changed, all of the treatments started to change. And that's when the magic started to happen. And I would argue that the science proves that anxiety is our body's solution to a problem, and that our jobs are to figure out how to respond and to actually heal. And so that's what the book is.
I love it. And a couple of things that are really standing out that you said, it's like up until now and still now, if you're just mainstream conventional, you never get asked the whys. And the whys are really what is needed for you to be able to process something, to be able to move through it, and then decide if it's serving you, not serving you any longer, what it did for you at the time. Like there's just a whole process to go through. And it's not just, oh, this happened to you when you were a kid. Oh, well, just forget about it. It's like, no, because you don't forget about it. Your subconscious does not forget about it. But recognizing that, oh, I feel this way and it's possibly due to something, but that something no longer serves me. So I need to figure out something different. And then it doesn't. And again, your body is wise. And you're right. The things that come out, like poor gut health, like anxiety, like symptomatic things, that is your body talking to you physically. It is telling you like something is off. The most frustrating part, though, is because our medical system is not cohesive and is not both-sided. It becomes a stress to try to figure out who to go to, who can help you. And I'm praying that in the next, years to come, something better, a model that says like, these are the people that can help you with this. I don't know, there has to be a different modeling going on, because people call me all the time, what functional person should I go to? It's really hard to say because what resonates with one is not going to resonate with the other. One person's good. So my advice is you start at spot A, you learn from them, you take what you need and you move on, because there's no two people know all the same things. It's impossible. So it's, again, empowering people to advocate for themselves and not feel like they have to be stuck in a position where they can't move. So I think your experience has brought you to where you are, and all of the things that you went through or that you had happen or didn't, that was you being led to something greater, right? And you're figuring out your whys. I think that was like a light bulb moment. Like when you said that, it's just like, yes, because when we can dig and find those whys, it really is healing. So I want to ask you, because anxiety is used a lot, but panic attacks are used a lot too. So what is the difference between having anxiety and panicking?
Yeah. I want to add a third column to that because this is the meat and potatoes of this whole conversation. So I love this. So it's, what's the difference between fear, panic, and anxiety?
I love that.
So we start with Susie, who lives during the prehistoric era, and she's gathering berries and she hears a growling in the distance. And Susie will survive this tiger who's coming because she has ancestors who evolved to detect threat, to mount a sufficient fear response, and to either fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, or fracture in response to that threat. So she survives, and then she has babies who have babies, and now we arrive in 2025, right? So fear is a natural response to perceived or actual danger. The difference is that in our modern era, we can experience that exact same set of sensations and emotions when we're actually safe and driving down the interstate, or when our kids are dawdling in the morning and we have a deadline and we're running late, or when we have an exam or a public speaking, when we're not actually in danger, but those same biological responses are going into play. So now we have anxiety and panic. The DSM, which is this big pink book for those who are watching the video, over my shoulder, I have a big purple book here. I said pink.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yep.
The big purple book here, this is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and this is created by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's the gold standard of diagnosis, where we take symptoms and we put them into major categories, and really, by and large, they're fairly arbitrary. So they would tell you that anxiety is something that we feel more days than not. It can interfere with our ability to function. Anxiety attacks are flares of that generalized anxiety, versus panic, they would define as coming out of the blue. But the research would argue otherwise. The research doesn't back this up. It takes so much time. There's so much caution tape, red tape, so much that slows down the innovation of diagnostics. But what we're actually finding is that the fear response is on a continuum, where on one end of the continuum, the body may whisper, and on the other end of the continuum, the body will shout. So I use it in the book. I talk about stoplight strategies. Green light is when we're grounded. Maybe you've studied polyvagal, and they call this your ventral vagal. You feel calm, you feel grounded, you feel connected to other people, you feel relaxed, physically, emotionally, mentally, you feel like yourself. And then there's a little bit of activation, and it could be fun activation. It could be stressful. It could be dangerous activation. But that's the moment when we notice, ooh, I'm a little bit activated. My body temperature's rising, or I'm holding my breath, or, ooh, I'm clenching my jaw a little bit. I call this the pay attention zone. This is that moment between when we go from green into yellow. And yellow is when the body's talking to you. And we all hear communication from our bodies in a lot of different ways, which we could get into later. And if that source of activation doesn't resolve, if we're not able to get out of that situation or relieve whatever it is, whether it's our blood sugar's a little bit off or the stimuli is a little bit off, or we're in a frozen body positioning and it's activating the brain. If whatever that root cause is isn't resolved, that will get louder and louder. And we get to the red light zone, and the red light zone is crisis. This is panic. This is when you feel like you may have a stroke or a heart attack, or you're raging or crying. That's whatever your flavor of crisis is. That's red light zone. So the gift of looking at it more on a spectrum is it empowers us to look at why the body is giving us these signals, and it equips us with much more precision solutions to put us back into balance so that we don't have to listen to the shouts. So that's kind of the answer to the fear versus anxiety versus panic.
Love all that. And I love the continuum, and I love the lights because people can associate with green, yellow, and red. And I think that's a good tool. As you're speaking, what's coming to my mind is that so many people live in the yellow constantly, and they're never in the green, or very rarely in the green. And so in that continuum, they're more leaning to the red. And so you go into red more often because you never go back down to green, because you don't have the tools to do that. So I believe why is super important. And I also believe having tools is super important, because without tools, you don't know, and then that's the education part, you don't know how to help yourself. But as you were talking about, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of the different things that can happen to us. And everybody's heard the bear analogy, and I feel like people, at least on my podcast, have heard a lot about things that happen that make us feel like a bear is chasing us, even though it's not even a bear situation. But what I would say to everybody, and I would love to get your take on this, is awareness. You have to be aware of your body. And I think so many people live in such a chaotic lifestyle, they're never taking time to think about the things that are happening. They're just boom, boom, boom until they get to red and crisis, when they can't do. And then now they just need a help and a solution. So I think being aware of what could happen and being aware that these are what your body does to tell you things is super important. So what is your take on helping people to be aware as things start to arise?
I love what you're talking about, is that radical acknowledgement and that noticing. That could be really scary for us. My husband, for example, like he basically is a medical degree by proxy, because he helped me study for everything. He was my guinea pig for all the exams. But he gets the heebie-jeebies when I feel his pulse, or anyone feels his pulse.
Interesting.
So it's just like, it's just too real. I'm in a body. And so for some of us, it can be very uncomfortable to be in the body. And especially for an anxiety warrior, is fear of the fear.
Yes.
I've spent so much of my time, and so many healers who've tried to help me solve the problem of fear or discomfort or anxiety or pain or whatever it is, indigestion, muscle soreness, whatever it is. We've spent so much time being programmed that discomfort is the problem, that the actual act of acknowledging and noticing and being with that discomfort can be one of the most corrective and powerful experiences. And I want to honor how difficult that can be. So we want to make sure that it feels manageable and bite-sized. Otherwise, for some of us, it could be a fire hose to the face of, oh, now I'm noticing everything. And what do I do with that?
Right.
And so a practical strategy that I would even suggest, if any of your listeners have young kids, is that we just practice interoceptive awareness. So maybe while we're brushing our teeth, every single morning and every single night while we're brushing our teeth, instead of pulling up YouTube or Instagram or walking around the house, is maybe just notice what the toothbrush feels like in your mouth. Maybe notice the mintiness in your mouth. Maybe you even might want to move out of your mouth with your awareness while you're brushing, and maybe even start at your feet. And what does it feel like with your feet on the ground? And The key for this is to work your way up your body and notice your body, but to not do anything about it. And that's the key, is if we're looking at our symptoms as problems to be solved, we're going to feel, oh my goodness, I notice it. What do I do about it? And we want to practice unbiased or unattached, just straight up noticing. So you kind of acknowledge it, like, oh, I have a little bit of a tingle in my tongue from this toothpaste. So I just notice it. Oh, I feel like I have a little bit of a shrug, tension in my shoulders. I'm not going to try to relax them. I'm just going to notice it. So we just start the process of familiarizing ourselves with our body. And what we're doing with that is that we're actually, from a state of intentionality, is we're activating parts of the brain that are associated with what we refer to as the executive control network. This is the part of the brain that's rational, logical. It will help us have a greater sense of personal power. This includes your prefrontal cortex. So now this part of the brain is getting activated because we're being intentional and it's being introduced to the body. It's noticing the body, which is quite different than dissociative default mode network, autopilot, ruminating, non-logical association. So I want to explain that. May I explain that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love
Okay.
that. Yes.
Because those got this a little bit more sciencey for just a moment there. So just think about your brain lives on two tracks. One track is autopilot. We see more anxiety, more hypochondriasis, more fibromyalgia, more pain when those areas of the brain are activated. This is like your insular cortex. This is your limbic system. This is your amygdala. This is very much, we're scanning our environment, and we're zoned out. And when we get more of that fight, flight, freeze, etc., we're more default mode. We spend about 95% of our time in default mode. It's a resting state for the brain. But your executive brain, that part of the brain that's logical, analytical, this is your intentional, this is your problem-solving brain. That part of the brain is anti-anxiety. They don't turn on at the same time. We have to switch back and forth between them. So if you start teaching your kids, and even you as an adult start practicing now, is being in your logical brain, say, okay, I'm going to notice my body right now. I'm going to notice the toothbrush. I'm going to notice the mint. I'm going to notice my feet. I'm going to notice the sensations. And I'm not going to try to change them. I'm just going to simply start to become more aware from an awakened place. That is one of the first most powerful steps towards then, well, what do we do about that? How do we reprogram that later down the road?
Yeah. And I love that. And it's kind of like a step before grounding, right? It's a step of awareness. And it's interesting because what I did teach my kids are the five senses of like when you do start to feel a rise, if you start to feel like your body's getting dysregulated, it's like, and the toothbrush thing is a great analogy because it's like your taste, your smell, your sense, feeling like figuring out what your body's doing. And I think the more that you practice that, the more aware you become, and then you can start to shift. I think your body naturally will shift and kind of come down. Because again, when you go in to brush your teeth, you're right. You're just on autopilot. You're just doing whatever, and whatever is happening around you, like whether you got to hurry up and make kids lunch or, you just had a bad day or whatever. It's like all of that stuff is inside of you still while you're standing there. And so like, notice those tense shoulders, and notice like how your gut feels and all of the things. I think I love that. I love that as being a first step to be aware of how your body feels. Because I feel like a lot of people are not associated with their body. I feel like they like you said, it's like, yeah, it's like neck up, you get the therapy part, but you never think about the factors of your body. So everybody can do that. That's listening. That's definitely a 1% shift you can take away when you're brushing your teeth tonight or tomorrow. And again, do it with your kids too. And if you have older kids, mention it to them and have them, they listen, even though we think they're not listening. These 19 and 22, they do listen. Any wisdom we can share with ourselves and with our families is what's going to help us to empower ourselves to be our healthiest version. So thank you for sharing that tangible, tactical takeaway for us. I want to just kind of back up for a second, because when people's bodies are dysregulated, when they may feel anxiety, what are some of the factors that people might not think about that could be part of the why? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And this I was hoping that you were going to circle back to this because you said something really wise in the beginning as you're referring to how our healthcare system is so siloed. And so you go to, if you have symptoms in your bladder, you go to a urologist. If you have symptoms in your gut, you go to a gastroenterologist. If you have symptoms of anxiety, you see a psychiatrist. You have symptoms of heart palpitations, you see a cardiologist. And so everything is so siloed. And we don't do that with mechanics. Your car isn't starting. A mechanic is going to look at the entire car within reason and try to figure out, is the spark plugs or the starter or the alternator? Or is there something is there gas in the gas tank? Is there oil in the oil tank, right? They're going to look at the totality, but we don't see much of that in modern medicine. We have a primary care, but oftentimes the primary care, the insurance model is such that they have 10 minutes with you max. And they're just trying to manage you acutely with something to relieve your suffering. And so that's kind of goes back to my suffering is a problem. My well-intended doctor wants to relieve that suffering. So they give me something to suppress it. They aren't the people who are often equipped and empowered with the ability to ask the why and go to the root cause. So the question is, well, how do we start to figure that out? And largely that's going to fall upon you as the listener, us as the individuals. We are the car. And so we want to empower you with the ability to think about it in a new way that you can then bring to your doctor to ask empowered questions, collaborate, and then perhaps, as you said, move on to the next expert, collaborate, and really create a whole cohesive picture. So where I would start with every single person is we start by getting a really good history. So number one is write down your origin story. What was it like for you as a child? What was your role? What was your birth like? Were you breastfed? Were you adopted? Were you given prescriptions? Did you have vaccine reactions? Did you have any health crises? Did you live in a moldy building, or did one of your parents work at Dow Chemical? Just write down as much as you can think of. And maybe if you feel comfy, is ask your siblings if you have them, ask your caretakers if they're still living, what it was like in your culture, in your home, in your house. And so once we know, we get a big dump, it could fill pages, it could fill one paragraph, then we're going to plot that on a timeline. And we're going to plot like, okay, this major thing happened on this date at this time, this major thing happened. So you're going to do that from birth to present. And then you're going to start thinking about your symptoms. And I always love to ask my patients, if we had a magic wand and could get rid of the top 5 things in order of importance for you, what would those be? So maybe it's anxiety, insomnia, headaches, constipation, and feeling a lack of confidence. So then you look at those symptoms and then you go back and you say, okay, well, when is the very first time I remember feeling anxious? Oh, okay, that was probably around 2002. And so then you plot that as early as you can remember. You plot that at 2002, and then you look at what was going on at that time or before and see if there may be any connection. So for example, for me and my story is my symptoms all started when I was 4 years old, and my mom went back to work and we moved to a new home. So my pre-kindergarten class changed. My mom, that attachment was severed. She was going back to work, and I was told that I started screaming in the middle of the night. And that little part, the body keeps the score. The body remembers that little part had difficulty sleeping. She felt scared and stressed, and there's a lot of turmoil. So the question is there any literature, any scientific studies that would support that original event for me could be impacting me when I'm 35 years old, right? And the research says yes. We see this coming out of the adverse childhood events studies that was done by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC. We see this coming out of the research for EMDR, other trauma informed. We see this in the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. We see this. And that may be a correlation, does not imply causation, but it's something to be curious about. So for me, I was curious, does my anxiety and sleep have anything to do with when it began when I was 4? I went and I did EMDR and I did internal family systems. And you want to know, my sleep got a lot better. But something else that happened at that time is I started to get a lot of allergies. So now we're in a different silo, right? So now we can start to ask the question, well, all right, well, what does the immune system have to do with sleep? What does the immune system have to do with anxiety? And just like you're saying, Robin, is a lot. In fact, histamine, that chemical that gives us the itchy eyes, the scratchy throat, the watery nose, that same chemical is as stimulating to our nervous system as adrenaline.
Interesting.
So now we're starting to see how they could go together. So then we start asking questions about the immune system. Well, what's my diet like? Do I have allergies? What's my environment like? And there's a ton of really great resources online where you can go to these great doctors that write blogs about immune system. What are signs that my immune system may be out of balance? What are tests that I might run to learn about my immune system? What are things that we could do to recalibrate? So a tangible 1% strategy you can do is just get really curious about your history and then start asking questions to connect the dots and go to the experts that might help fill in the blanks for you.
I love it. I think I always start with clients with their story because they don't understand at the moment why it is so impactful, but your story matters. And because the body keeps score, because your subconscious doesn't forget, right? Because those things live there and you might not even know they're living there. So your story, and just like that's why I asked your story at the beginning, I feel all of us, if you're human, your story matters and your story helps paint the picture of how you got where you are, because nobody just wakes up unhealthy. Nobody, you don't just wake up with heart condition. You don't just wake up with thyroid. Like there's things that have happened throughout your life. But the other thing you said that just popped back in my mind was the generational thing.
Yes.
It's because you might be born because your mom had anxiety. You might have that predisposition to it, but you don't even. So again, it is like there is that lineage thing again that we don't really think about and talk about, but your immune system, your environmental factors, your, relationships, your past traumas, where you are spiritually. We call all of these things from where I was taught. These are all primary foods. They're things off your plate that feed your soul. And if they're out of balance, you could do all the great eating and you're still not going to be your healthiest version. And so I think we have to remember, but it's hard to reimagine and come from a different lens, because like you were saying, the medical is so siloed. We're not a siloed human being. Everything we have is connected. And we have to realize that through that connection, we get to know ourselves better. And then we can start picking things apart. So just really good information. I think that's great that you talked about those little things and I love the timeline. I think that's again, a really good concrete. So if your mom or dad are still alive, I think it's a good idea to ask, like, what is your birth story? And what was your childhood? What was the dynamic, because you don't remember because you were a baby, so it's asking some of those things and talking to your siblings if you have them still. So I think those are things that we can all do. I want to just shift a little bit because we're looking back, we're seeing our history, but when somebody is going through what's diagnosed or considered to be anxiety, what are some of the outward experiences people can feel or have that would say this could be that?
Yeah. So what does anxiety look like? And how do we know? Because actually one of the most common myths about anxiety is that we don't have anxiety.
Right.
So what does it look like? Because if we were to put on our researcher's hat and go out into the city center where we live and ask every single person we encounter, what is it like for you when you're stressed or when you're anxious or when you're overwhelmed? We're going to get a lot of different answers. So I did a lit analysis and I looked at all of the different types of answers that people gave when they were asking these questions. I looked at my clinical experience working with patients and of course my experience as what it means to be human, and found that anxiety can be divided into approximately 9 categories. The gift of categorization, just like with the DSM, the gift of categorization is it opens the doors for better research and it opens the doors for more questions. And it can also help us zero in on where we might focus in asking the questions. And otherwise it could be a huge, like,
Right. Well, and I also like it. I like it because we think that way. You
yeah,
know, that's just linear. It's like how our brain thinks for most people. You're not labeling yourself, but it does allow you to understand better that this thing could be part of this thing. And people haven't been taught that yet. So I'm curious, what are those 9 things?
yes, I call these the 9 types of anxiety. The quiz for that is in the book Panic Proof, but you can also take it for free on my website,
Okay.
drnicolecain.com, the 9 types of anxiety.
And all
And
of this I will drop in the show notes. So if you're driving or you're walking and you don't have a pen or pencil, I'll do it all. Yeah, don't fret. We'll put it in the show notes.
So the first one is thought anxiety. So this is if you get racing thoughts, looping thoughts, obsessive thoughts, maybe you get depressed thoughts, future tripping thoughts, or maybe your brain goes blank. Like you're asked a question and you're like, nope, my brain is blank. Sorry.
Hmm.
ADHD. Oftentimes I see people are given a diagnosis of ADHD when really what's driving it is anxiety. It's a fear response. And so that's thought anxiety. We have chest anxiety. This is anxiety where we feel like our heart is pounding or we're skipping beats, or maybe you feel like you can't get a big enough breath. One of the main causes of emergency room visits is that people are concerned that they're having a heart attack, but over 80% of those, it's not a heart attack. Their heart is healthy. It's anxiety. So chest anxiety. We've gut anxiety. So I see this a ton in kids and adolescents: gas, bloating, nausea, vomiting. I'm so nervous. I don't want to go to school. My tummy is upset, right? So the gut talks. We've studied ad nauseum the gut brain axis. The gut has a lot to say. In fact, the communication highway between the gut and brain is bidirectional, but the gut does over 80% of that communicating. So there's gut anxiety. We have endocrine anxiety, which is anxiety that is rooted in the hormones. So I'm thinking about thyroid, cortisol, our sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And oftentimes I have patients who call me and they've just had a plain old TSH run, thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's like the mom just saying, I told my kids, go clean your room. And just because I told them, then therefore I'm going to assume that they've cleaned it. We all know, if anyone has had kids, that it's not a guarantee that just because you told them to do something that they did it. You have to check the room. And it's the same with our thyroid health. Is if your doctor's just doing a TSH, they know the brain is talking. They don't know what the thyroid is doing. So endocrine anxiety. We have immune system anxiety, which we talked about, touched on briefly, as we see the immune system. I actually just did a talk like 4 days ago on psychobioneuroimmunology as it relates to anxiety and panic at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health Conference. It's a worldwide conference, and we're seeing so much in the relationship between our immune system, our nervous system, and our mental health. And
I 100% agree with that.
they are talking. So we have immune system anxiety. We have depressive anxiety, which is anxiety with depression mixed. We have anger anxiety, which is anger mixed with anxiety. And then I think the last one, we got through them all. Nervous system anxiety, we didn't do that one. So nervous system anxiety is anxiety that's more in the nerves themselves. And so some people will have a panic attack and they'll say, oh my God, I can't feel my face. Am I having a stroke? Or they'll get a migraine or a tension headache, or their muscles are sore, right? That's nervous system anxiety. And then the very last one is trauma anxiety. And really, truly, arguably, trauma is the umbrella of all of it. I've parsed that one out in the event that the main thing is acute stress or traumatic response, like I have flashbacks or I have intrusive thoughts or I have memories. We want to really, before you do anything else, is just target the trauma. And so if that's the case, then doing trauma therapy would be number 1. So those are the 9 types.
Love it. And I think, again, a tangible thing as you leave today, you can definitely go and do that little quiz. And I think, if nothing else, it's from a lens of curiosity, just to see what comes up for you. Because I think, again, the more we can get to learn ourselves and get to know our bodies and our health, the healthier we can, create longevity and all of that. One of the things I wanted to touch on, because as kids, I definitely would have to say, just through all of this and thinking about things, I'm sure I probably could have been diagnosed with anxiety, fear of standing up in front of the class. But with my kids, I try to explain to them, and I'd love to get your view on this. It's like, when you have those feelings in your gut, whether it's a little bit of nerves or whether it's fear or just being scared of something new, we can let that debilitate us, right? But we can also understand that if we had no response, if we didn't feel anything going into a new situation or something out of the ordinary, if we just felt nothing, that would also be odd, because that would mean your body has zero feelings, right? But it's like, when you get the butterfly feelings, it's, what do you do with that? Do you let it over? And that's the awareness, right? That's the awareness of like, what am I feeling? What is happening around me? Why am I feeling this? And then consciously making a choice that you have to sometimes push through those little butterfly things and get up and stand up. I didn't have anybody to help me with that, to push me. So I just didn't do it. I just took a 0, and it was like, obviously now I'm 52 and I'm in a very different place. We should feel things. It's just the level of feelings. But I love how you categorized them into the 9, because if we do have like gut issues, or we're burping, or we're feeling nauseous, or all these things, most of the time people don't relate it to that.
Right.
And so it's just educating people to have an awareness that some of these medical things could actually be related to something completely different. So I think that's the takeaway that I got, that I hope everybody walks away with, because again, it's getting to know yourself a little bit better. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about, the myths of, because this has been a lot, well, in my world of what I'm seeing and reading and educating myself. Back, when anxiety first came onto the scene, it was known as a chemical imbalance. Like, you don't have enough serotonin. And I've had a different experience through my children. All your neurotransmitters matter. It's not just serotonin, and serotonin's made in your gut. So there's that, gut brain correlation. But what do you know for sure about that conversation? So
You're a forerunner in this question. That conference that I was just speaking at, I talked about this, and my audience were integrative physicians, and there were
Okay.
audible gasps in the room from
Mhm.
integrative physicians, and you're asking this question. So we're putting you at the level or farther than a lot of these doctors. And so kudos to you. So the chemical imbalance theory started in the 1960s. We discovered the first neurotransmitter, which is interamine, I think in 1937. And then around the 60s, a physician had the hypothesis of, what if we manipulate levels of this interamine serotonin? What would that do? And so they did. They gave more serotonin to study participants, and they noticed that for some reason, some of these study participants were a little bit happier, a little bit less depressed. Now, I want to put a nuance in that, is that it was only a statistically significant point of 2 points on more than a 52-point scale. So it's barely better than placebo.
Okay.
But they saw something, and they're like, oh, when we give these things to increase serotonin, some people feel slightly better. Therefore, they jumped to the conclusion that therefore more serotonin means less depression and anxiety, and less serotonin means more depression and anxiety. And then the pharmaceutical companies created Prozac, which took more than 30 studies to prove it beat placebo. And then there was all sorts of direct consumer marketing. I remember when I was out as an early doctor, we would get Zoloft pens and stress balls and lunches, a lot of grooming to dispense these pharmaceuticals. And then in 2022, there's this huge meta-analysis that was done where researchers looked at all the publications based on the chemical imbalance theory, and they concluded that without a doubt, there is no correlation between serotonin levels, depression, and anxiety. So what does that mean? It means that we came to the wrong conclusion, and we've been stuck in the wrong conclusion since the 60s.
Wow.
What a good place to be, though, right? Because it's sad that that's where we've been, and it took that to get there. And I'm celebrating this discovery because
Absolutely.
now we get to ask why. When we give someone an SSRI or an SNRI, why do some people feel better and some people feel nothing and other people feel worse? Now we get to start asking, what are these medications actually doing? because they're not just fixing serotonin and making us better. So a couple of theories is that certain SSRIs like Zoloft and Celexa's and another one is that they're slightly anti-inflammatory. And so
Interesting.
if you have immune system anxiety driven by inflammation, SSRI, specific SSRI can bring down the inflammation just a little bit to create a little bit of relief. But here's the thing, Robin, and I know you know this, is we have way better anti-inflammatories that don't have
100%.
black box warnings of suicidal depression, right?
Absolutely.
So now we get to ask about the gut. When we take an SSRI, we know that a big side effect is diarrhea or constipation. So, okay, it's talking to the gut. What's it doing to the gut? The gut matters, right?
Right.
It's talking to the immune system. The immune system changes. We see changes in our mood. Why is that happening? So now we get to ask more interesting questions, I think.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'm so glad I asked you that question. And again, I'm not here casting judgment on people that take an SSRI or an SSRM because sometimes it is absolutely needed to help somebody while they're helping themselves with other modalities. But what I would caution people that I've learned along the way is before jumping on something, one of the questions I would wholeheartedly ask is for the blood test to see which of the drugs basically there is a blood test that you can do that tells you what drugs you're more compatible with due to your genetics, because your genetics is something that people, I think it's coming to the forefront a little bit more, but I think genetics is something that people are not and have not really taken into consideration. And you and I are completely different. So you're going to react to something way differently than I'm going to react to something. I've got an MTRHF gene mutation. I've got slow COMT. I've got lots of like just dysfunctional pathways due to some genetics and then some damage over the years. And so I'm going to react completely different to you that might not have any of that. So I think, again, it's not that I'm against taking them, asking the questions and not just accepting, reading the inserts, the black box warning, knowing what the side effects could be, really educating yourself to know the pros and the cons. It's called informed consent. And we all deserve that. But I also find it really interesting that 90% of conventional people just give the pill and they never talk about lifestyle. They never ask you the questions that you just stated or what's happening in your life, or all of that matters. It all is a cumulative ball that snowballs and makes things happen. So those are the types of things as you walk away from today's episode, when you are having a conversation with your doctor and they have you fill out that little questionnaire, you need to be informed to go in with questions. And again, ask to make sure that they're right for you as an individual. And then even if you do get on them as a Band-Aid, you need to be asking, what else can I do? And if they don't have answers, it's up to you to either find someone who can, which is probably more integrative functional, or there's tons of research at this point. There's tons of PubMed articles. There's people to follow. I mean, the content that's out there, not that everything's legit, but it's a starting point. You know, finding somebody like yourself who's very reputable, who speaks at conferences, who knows their stuff, these are the kinds of people you should be following if you are in some type of, situation where you're trying to educate yourself. So I'm so glad I asked you that.
I love that too. And I love that you're including the nuance to that conversation. Is for me, Lexapro was one of the things that helped get me out of that rock bottom. And there's a semicolon after that instead of just Lexapro, period, end of story, which is what I was told as a young person. Is let's change that period to a semicolon and maybe it will help a little bit. And then that gives us the space and the bandwidth to then ask all of the whys.
Yes, exactly.
I really, really honor. And I wish there were more practitioners doing that. I think our insurance model system sets us up for failure in many ways. And so it's going to reside on you as the empowered listener, as the mom, as the friend, the daughter, the sister, to ask those questions and to find the practitioner.
So I'm curious, because you said semicolon. So the Lexapro helped you, which again, I think it's great that you had something that could help you to give you the mental bandwidth to be able to. So what came after your semicolon? Like what were some of the non-traditional things that aren't spoken about in a conventional doctor's office that really truly helped you to get back to thriving, aside from the, trauma part or the childhood things and things like that? What were some like tactical things that you started to do?
I did all of the beautiful, wonderful things because I'm a naturopath. So I've done the herbs, the nervous system reprogramming, the amygdala deamplification, and acupuncture and diet and habits. And so I'm a little different from perhaps the average person who's like, oh, what's acupuncture, right? In that I'd done all of those things. But honestly, what I think is one of the most important factors, and you always ask your audience, your interviewer, what's their non-negotiable. So this is my non-negotiable, is what is your obstacle to healing? Because here's the thing, if somebody comes in and they're like, my toe hurts, my toe is like hurting so bad, I'm limping when I'm walking, I can give you all of the things to heal that toe so it doesn't hurt. I can do that like a boss. I'm really good at that. But then you come back next week and it's hurting again. You come back the week after and it's hurting again. So if we get curious and we ask why, we may find out that you go bowling and every week you accidentally drop that bowling ball on that toe. It's an obstacle to cure. So for me, I was doing all of the right things and I was taking all the right herbs. I was doing the meditations. I was building a spiritual practice. I was doing all the things I write about in my book, but I had an obstacle to cure. And the obstacle to cure was what I was saying yes to. And I ended up having to sell my half of the business, and I made a big lifestyle change. And I think for many of us, that's the big pink elephant that we don't want to face is, am I a caretaker? Am I working 4 jobs? Do I prioritize time for myself to get away from constantly caring for other people? Is there an obstacle to cure? Do you need a relationshipectomy, right? What is getting in the way of your body, your mind, and your nervous system doing what it is naturally designed to do? So if you've been trying all the things, that may be the question. And that's what it was for me, is what's your obstacle to cure?
I absolutely love that. And I think that's such an amazing question to kind of end with, because I feel like it is something that is never asked, but usually is the biggest elephant in the room. And I think what that means for me is having the courage to think about it, but not just think about it, but to actually take action. And so when we're in a place that is not aligned any longer or never was, if we are doing things that may have once worked, or you're surrounding yourself with people or job or whatever, those primary things that are just not really in alignment, that's can be scary. But the courage that it takes to recognize it as an obstacle in your healing journey, and then taking those action steps. And that's why I always talk about the 1%, because it's really hard to flip your life overnight. But once you are aware and you recognize and you can pinpoint, then you can start taking action. And even just by admitting it, writing it, praying about it, all of those things gives your body like a weight lifted, because it now knows your body, you're telling your body, like, we're going to be doing, your brain's telling your body, we're going to start doing some things that are going to shift that obstacle. And it might take time, but, and when you said caregiver, that rang very deep in my soul right now, because I am caring for my mom, but I cared for her 2 different separate times. And the first time I did not have the proper skills, and I hadn't really done the look back at my life and see why I was behaving in some of the ways, right? And then in this new chapter of her doing caregiving again, I do have those tools, and I know that I need to take the time for myself. And I know that I'm not responsible for all of it. And building that team, and that was the obstacle. The obstacle was my mind thinking I had to do it all. And once I recognized that, and then I was like, that's not my job. My job is to build the care team for her, to make sure she's supported and loved the best, and be her daughter. So that when you're talking about obstacles come in all shapes and sizes. That's what my example is different than leaving a job, but I just wanted to tell people another side of it, because sometimes it's an emotional thing. It's not just, or an expectation you think, because again, of how you grew up, you were expected to do certain things. And So the bottom line of that is just that obstacles come in all shapes and sizes and forms, and no one is better or less, greater or less than the other. So we just have to recognize and honor it.
I really admire that so much, that level of self-reflection, because there's so much that's entwined in that of I should do this, I should say yes, I must, so really asking questions of, did this come from me? Is this my belief? Is this a belief or a pattern I inherited? And as you were saying, there's really no right or wrong answer, generally speaking, but really personal. And so having the bravery to even think about that and ask that question.
It's uncomfortable. And again, it's just not something, it's uncomfortable because we haven't been taught to do it. And I think, honestly, we can start even in kindergarten, first grade, like, what is your obstacle here? And having kids think in that manner would really set them up for a brighter future when they get to the hard things that mean more than the things when you're in kindergarten. And again, the things in kindergarten are just as important. They're just at a different level. So as we end, she did tell us her non-negotiable, but I want to tell you guys that, this book isn't just a book to read. It's educational, it's informative. And if you have ever experienced or you're experiencing or your children are, it's just something that I feel like everybody should own, read, and then even if you don't even use it for yourself, tell other people about it, because this is how we heal, is by uplifting other people and helping them discern what is meant for them and not meant for them and things like that. I'm so happy that you wrote that book, and I'm very, very, very happy to have met you today. I feel like we're definitely just started the beginning of a relationship, and I can't wait to see where it takes us. So for all of you listening, again, I know that you can take away tons of different 1% shifts, create some new habits, and really start to bring yourself into the space where you want to heal yourself. So any final words that you have?
Just that the results of this work are just so absolutely incredible. It doesn't have to be just surviving. You can really, truly thrive. And so have high expectations, my friends.
I love it. All right. Take care, y'all, and I'll see you next week.
That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources, and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all.